Hello. It is July the 1st. That means it's opening day for the mini semester at MTSU and for our course Evolution in America. Second time I've taught it in 2018. And we got to actually meet in physical space on a college campus 2 years ago in the pre-pandemic era. And I hope we'll do it again in the future, but this is going to be a remote course involving videos and Zoom sessions. We'll have one tonight. And I thought, by way of not exactly getting into our topic, but introducing some of the themes, that I might talk about my favorite philosopher, William James. No, it won't be the last time. But I've lately been recording a series of audio recordings, installments of a discussion of James and the biography that the recently deceased Robert Richardson wrote, called In the Maelstrom of American Modernism. William James in the Maelstrom of American Modernism. And it's a terrific biography. Richardson was a terrific writer. He also wrote about Thoreau and Emerson. And I just wanted, partly by way of commemorating his life and work, I wanted to revisit that biography. And so years ago, about a decade ago, I had one of my classes read and discuss that biography. So these were installments written for that class. We talked about Richardson's book every Friday at that time. So I've been running these installments since last week. I'm up to number 7. And so I'm just going to go through that, and eventually we'll work my way backwards and forwards, and we'll get through the whole thing. This isn't entirely directly related to our subject matter, but in many ways it is. It raises the topic of evolution. But this post this morning is called William James 7-talk, words. I'll explain that title in a moment. Can't resist that tagline on our first designated class date. We'll be Zooming tonight of the July mini semester. What an awful trade that of professor is, James complained at term's end one year. But no, it's not really such an awful trade, professor. I love talking with students. We'll love talking with you all. And I couldn't do it without all those words. But the point that James was making, and that it is always crucial for all of us in the so-called verbalities and verbosities trade, it's crucial to remind ourselves that everything cannot be converted to words. We'll do our best, but realize that life is richer than we've figured out how to corral with language. So with that proviso, let's talk. First, though, that phrase, verbalities and verbosities, that comes from a marvelous essay by William James, called On a Certain Blindness in Human Beings. And here's just a snippet of that, if I can call it up quickly. Nah, you know what? Never mind. We'll look at that later. So, to Richardson's biography. It is 1883. James is 41 and a success in his chosen vocation. He's about to be promoted to full professor. Like many who marry relatively late, it has taken him a while to settle comfortably into the group dynamic of family life and the checks it inevitably places on a bachelor's accustomed unconditioned freedom. But settle he has, and the stability and safe haven of home are reflected in the growing confidence of his philosophic voice. Death has not, however, taken a holiday, as we actually learned in the previous installment. His mother and father are recently deceased. Brother Wilkie will soon join them. Then William and Alice will lose a child, 18-month-old Herman. We forget how precarious life was day to day not so long ago. Infant mortality used to be shockingly high. Darwin himself lost more than one child and was profoundly affected by that, as what decent parent wouldn't be. The shocking death of his little son, for James, coalesced with the lingering grief that he felt for his parents. Years later, he would attest to anyone who has ever looked on the face of a dead child or parent, the mere fact that matter could have taken for a time that precious form ought to make matter sacred forever after. That beloved incarnation was among matter's possibilities. And that is directly relevant to the course, Evolution in America. So many critics of evolution tend to think that the core problem with it is its commitment to a material understanding of reality, to material science, materialism, or some form of naturalism, or the more in vogue term these days, physicalism. Well, James had an answer to that. It doesn't matter whether the ultimate stuff of reality is called matter or what it's called, whatever you call it, and whatever its ultimate composition, it gives rise to the precious loved ones and to all the joys as well as all the sorrows of life. Matter is capable of sustaining whatever we care about. A lot of academic debate gets sidetracked into an abstract and ultimately pointless discussion about whether the ultimate constituents of things are material or ideal or something else. And James always tried to work around that and get to the heart of what really matters. Well, James had no insuperable problem with metaphysical materialism. Determinism, however, was another matter. The Dilemma of Determinism, an essay that James wrote in his middle period, began as a Harvard lecture in 1884, and it would remain one of his clearest statements of objection to the denial of free will. Like I.B. Singer's, his position was unequivocal, if also a bit ironic and self-deprecating. Did he believe in free will? He said, "Do I have a choice?" Citing the example of a brutal spousal murder, James again challenges the reader to feel the preposterous implausibility of hard determinism. For the deterministic philosophy, the murder was necessary from eternity. Can we believe that? James says no, something else would really have been better in its place. Of course. James sees the dispute between determinism and freedom as decisive, as requiring definite decision. One must choose between these incompatible visions of two alternative futures, he says, which we conceive. Both may now be really possible, and the one becomes impossible only at the very moment when the other excludes it by becoming real itself. Indeterminism thus denies the world to be one unbending unit of fact. It says there is a certain ultimate pluralism in it. To that view, actualities seem to float in a wider sea of possibilities, from out of which they are chosen. Determinism, on the contrary, says they exist nowhere, and that necessity on the one hand and impossibility on the other are the sole categories of the real. Possibilities that fail to get realized are, for determinism, pure illusions. They never were possibilities at all. There is nothing inchoate, it says, about this universe of ours. All that was or is or shall be actual in it, having been from eternity virtually there. The issue, it will be seen, is a perfectly sharp one, which no eulogistic terminology can smear over or wipe out. The truth must lie with one side or the other, and its lying with one side makes the other false. James has also now begun serious work on what will eventually be published as Principles of Psychology in 1890. And he's named the, quote, wonderful stream of consciousness, for which he is still largely remembered. His delightfully pictorial imagination likens consciousness to avian flights and perchings, the transitive and substantive forms of experience. And he refuses to accept the notion that whatever is real is always conceptually and nominally precise. Language is limited. It dulls our powers of discernment and discrimination if we lean too heavily on it. Nonverbal experience is rich but difficult to contain and identify and talk about. It acquaints us, for instance, with vague feelings of relation, like the feeling of if, and, or but, that are no less real than more substantive things. It is evanescent, impressionistic, fluid, streamy. Good word. And as I've already noted, one of my favorite James quotes comes from this middle period. What an awful trade that of professor is, paid to talk, talk, talk. What an awful universe it would be if everything could be converted to words, words, words. True. But consider as well what an awful universe it would be if nothing could be converted to words. So we do what we can. We muddle through. And I, for one, am not going to give away my library anytime soon. Being open and hospitable to the non-verbal dimensions of life and being conscientious in his devotion to building the fledgling field of psychology into an inclusive science, James at this time got seriously into the world of the paranormal. He attended countless psychic seances conducted by spirit mediums, so-called, alert to possibilities no longer taken seriously by scientists in our time, but still wildly popular with the devotees of contemporary media stars like James Van Praagh and John Edward. It bothered James that there was a mass of alleged testimony about such things, at which the only men capable of a critical judgment, men of scientific education, will not even look. So he says, look, what have you got to lose? Is such testimony fraudulent? You won't know if you don't check it out. If you don't, you're as guilty of self-deception as the worst spiritualist showman. There is no source of deception in the investigation of nature which can compare with a fixed belief that certain kinds of phenomena are impossible. That was originally published in October of 2009. If you want to read the text of it, it's posted today on my blog site, which I call Up at Dawn. It's actually Up at Dawn 2.0. The address is jposopher or jposopher.blogspot.com. And one more note on this date, July the 1st. It is the anniversary today of the joint reading of Charles Darwin and Alfred Russel Wallace's papers on evolution to the Linnean Society in 1858. Wallace, whose name is less known to history, nearly scooped Darwin with his own independent research into natural selection. And at that point, friends urged Darwin to hurry up. And, they jointly read those papers. Wallace was gracious enough to defer to Darwin and say he was the real pioneer in these studies. They both deserve great credit. All right. Talk to you later, some of you, and check out the next installment of the James bio coming soon, and the previous one. Talk to you later.